This is a Queen Bee Radio High School sports presentation.
Welcome to the season premiere of the Queen Bee Radio High School Football Roundup. I'm your host, Tyler Diktanas, and our Queen Bee Radio sports team is getting the season started early with our conference preview week. I'll be joined by our football broadcast team throughout the week to recap a wild and fun 2023 season, as well as preview and maybe predict a little bit about what we think will happen in the 2024 football season. And we'll kick things off with the SWC, and I am joined by the fill-in-the-blank truther, Steve Prestegard, and welcoming back Gary Craugh to our Queen Bee Radio sports family. Gentlemen, thanks for jumping on and talking some football, and let's talk about the SWC, a very fun and competitive conference headlined by the amazing season that the Platteville Hillmen had. They won the conference with an undefeated conference record, earned themselves a #1 seed in Division 4 before falling in Level 2 to Lakeside Lutheran. Lancaster was the runner-up, but they went deep in the postseason, going to Level 3 in Division 6, where they fell just short against the Darlington Redbirds. Prairie du Chien seemed to be a juggernaut to begin the season last year, going 2-0 against Aquinas and Darlington before losing to Lancaster and Platteville, finishing in third place. And then Brodhead Judah did make the playoffs out of the SWC last year, but they have a new head coach, Gus Wadig, replacing Jim Matthias, who stepped down at the end of last year. River Valley and Dodgeville struggled last year with some young teams, and they are hoping to improve this year. And new to the conference this year, New Glarus coming over from the Capital Conference after ending their co-op with Monticello. And we'll start things off with the Platteville Hillmen. Steve, we've got the Hillmen all season long on Extreme 107.1, and you earned yourself the nickname of the Platteville Truther for driving the bandwagon during our preview show last year and throughout the duration of the season. How much room is there on the bandwagon this year? Because the Hillmen return a lot of firepower from last year's team.
Oh, I guarantee you there's plenty of room on the bandwagon. And I'm sure, I think, what are they selling this year? Hats, possibly? Last year was signs.
We need to print the shirts, yeah.
Yeah, they will give you as many as you want. Obviously, Platteville made a huge jump from 2022 to 2023. There was what should have been murderous stretch right in the middle of the season where they played Brodhead Judah, Prairie du Chien, and Lancaster back to back to back. And I think that there were some people who thought, those are great teams. They might lose all three of them. I'm not sure how many people thought they would actually win all three of them, but Platteville beat Brodhead Judah 14-6. That was maybe the first time last year that people thought, well, this might be a pretty good team. They went to Prairie du Chien, kind of a weird situation. It was an afternoon game because of the lights issues. And Prairie du Chien wanted to play keep away, run the ball a lot and eat clock and all of that. And it didn't work. Platteville beat them 21-0. And then a team that obviously had a great defense at the start of the year promptly gives up 46 points to Lancaster, but wins anyway because they scored 47 and they stopped Lancaster on 5 two-point conversions. So it was the first time in, I think, 18 or 17 years that they went undefeated in the conference. It was the first time they had a home game in like 6 years, I believe, for the playoffs. First time they'd ever had a #1 seed. And other than 3 offensive line starters and a couple of additional people, they've got most everybody back. And I think that's why there's a lot of optimism about Platteville this season.
Yeah, that game that you were talking about, the one between Platteville and Lancaster, it was inches on that final 2-point conversion that ultimately decided the game and the conference, to be quite honest, and how that snowballed into how the teams were going to be seated in their respective divisions and things like that. We talked about how football's a game of inches, and it was just inches that kind of sealed the fate for both of those teams in that classic game that you and Josh Wiederholt got to call last season. And we talked about Platteville. Let's talk about the Lancaster Flying Arrows. We'll have them on 97.7 Country WGLR throughout the season. A great season for Jordan Rolland and his team, 10-2 overall last year. Their only losses were that insane 47-46 loss to Platteville. And then a 28-22 thriller against Darlington in the Level 3 playoffs. They had big wins against Prairie du Chien in Week 3 in come-from-behind fashion, and then that big upset win against Kenosha St. Joseph in Level 2, that signature win for Jordan Rolland in his tenure as the Arrows head coach. Gary, the Arrows are losing their workhorse running back in Peyton Alvarado, but they've got a ton of skill players coming back that should be key contributors for this Flying Arrows team.
Yeah, Nolan Wolf, the quarterback, had a pretty decent year with almost 1,200 yards passing. Alvarado, though, yeah, that's a big chunk of 1,900 yards you're going to lose there for the offense. But Lancaster always has been able to retool over the offseason, so to speak. I mean, they've been doing it for decades. And I don't expect much of a drop-off, if any, from the Arrows this year.
Yeah, the Arrows really relied on Alvarado, especially the first 3 weeks of the season. I think he was in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 carries per game. It was the game against Mauston where the Arrows unveiled what Tom Nices and I called the Arrow Raid offense, where they started getting Taylor Williams and Quentin Plessel more of the football during the season. And then Samaji Benson, love him as a running back. He's a very speedy runner. So there's going to be a lot of speed with this Lancaster Arrows team, I believe, in the 2024 season. And, you know, as we kind of look at the landscape of the conference, it just seems really weird that, you know, Prairie du Chien, you know, granted, they only lost to the top two teams, but, you know, it really seems like at the beginning of the season that they were going to be the juggernaut team to really take over the conference. But, you know, again, Lancaster winning in Prairie du Chien and come from behind fashion. Steve, you talked about Platteville shutting them out in that afternoon game in Prairie. I have to imagine Prairie du Chien's got a chip on their shoulder as they head into the 2024 season, Steve.
Well, I certainly think that's the case. And, you know, they've got arguably the area's best all-around player, perhaps, in Blake Thierry, who was their leading rusher and receiver last year, and was a great player on defense and a great special teams player. And you could say he's a Division I player because he's going to Indiana next year. So I think the question for the Blackhawks is going to be what's around him. They do have their quarterback, Abe Amundsen, but you know, you feel like Prairie du Chien, kind of their whole thing last year was, well, we're going to just grind it out. And when they played Lancaster, they found a team that could overcome that. And then when they played Platteville, they played a team that they could stop that. And, you know, things, I guess it's kind of funny for a season like Prairie had to be considered a disappointment, but, you know, they had the two big hiccups in the middle, and, you know, that's kind of a weird way to have your season go, you know, off the rails, I suppose you could say, but that is kind of what happened. But I think Prairie du Chien, I have to believe that the top three teams in the SWC in some order are going to be Platteville, Prairie, and Lancaster. And of course, the fun thing about it also is that, you know, Platteville's going in Division 4 for the playoffs, most likely. Prairie's going to be in Division 5, and Lancaster, I would guess, would be in Division 6. So you could have three teams out of the SWC that might have a shot at going halfway decently far in different divisions in the postseason, regardless of how they finish in the conference.
I think the other thing Prairie du Chien's going to have to overcome, though, is the number of people they graduated out. I mean, they lost 12 or 13 kids from last year's squad, and several of them were in the top half of their rushing, receiving, you know, categories. So, I mean, if they've got underclassmen that can come in and fill those shoes, they may be all right.
Well, the other thing, too, is that I haven't checked this, but I would be curious as to how many offensive linemen they have back, because I think everybody knows that the most important position group is the offensive line. That is the one question for Platteville, because they've got three offensive line starters who have graduated. So they might be relatively inexperienced. The good thing about Platteville is that they have those guys will be probably part of the defensive line rotation they had. They rotated 6 guys on the defensive line last year. So they may not actually be as inexperienced on the line as they might look like they are. And, you know, as far as the O-line goes, also as far as Lancaster, I think one of the reasons they're as successful as they are, everybody looks at Alvarado yes, and Nolan Wolf and, fast other players, but they had an offensive line that there were some teams that literally could not stop it. It was like having five, John Deere bulldozers going down the field, basically. And I think that was really a big reason for Lancaster's success last year.
Well, talking about Prairie du Chien and their offensive line, I do happen doing a little research, Steve. I did find out. They have 6 individuals at both O-line and D-line, and then there were 2 others that were strictly D-line. So they lost 8 guys that played, any one of the line positions. That's a big chunk to overcome.
Yep. Yes, that is.
Yeah, for Prairie du Chien, Blake Thierry is the player that I have my eye on throughout the conference, not just because of the fact that he's a D1 athlete, but just the way that that Prairie uses him in their offensive scheme. He's listed as a tight end, but really list him as a weapon because they will put him in at any position that they need to. The way to win is to get the football in his hands, and I think that he's certainly one of the top players in the conference to have your eye on. Other players to have our eye on in the SWC this year, Steve. Who are some of the other players in the SWC that you have your eye on?
Well, as far as now, I have to look. As far as the teams go, we haven't mentioned Broadhead Judah yet. They have been kind of an instant success as soon as they got into the conference, of course, and that was why Platteville's beating them was such a big thing last season. They will have a new coach. They were kind of hit by graduation. Also, one of the players they lost was Blake Matthias, although he didn't play very much because he got hurt. It appears that Broadhead Judah's got some depth issues, so that's going to be kind of a thing. You got a very good running back in River Valley, but that may be kind of all they have at this point. It's kind of weird because Wisports has them picked for last, and I have a kind of difficulty believing that that's going to be the case. But other than Andy Fiske, I guess the question becomes, what do they have back? The question mark maybe in the whole conference is New Glarus. We don't know about them because on the one hand, they did have a halfway decent season this year or last year. They did make the playoffs. But remember, that was New Glarus Monticello. That was a co-op team that was like 40 years old. But Monticello decided to play 8-player by itself. And New Glarus, even though they play in the Capital Conference, which is a very good conference, well, now they're in a different conference. And they have a considerably smaller roster now. And they are now, I would believe, the second smallest school enrollment-wise, I would think, in the SWC. So it's going to be a real interesting year for New Glarus. And then, of course, you have Richland Center and Dodgeville, and they're kind of, I hate to say this, but they are kind of in perpetual rebuild mode. They've had good players, they've had good athletes, but they don't have enough of them. And, Richland Center's gone through several coaches over the years. That's not really a good formula for success. And I guess we'll see about Dodgeville. They've shown a little bit of progress the last couple of years, but, they need to take a bigger step than that, obviously, to become an SWC contender.
As you said, Dodgeville, they seem like they've been almost rebuilding for the last almost 2 decades. They've always had, a couple of really good players. But as you said, Steve, just not enough that can really help out the entire squad. And it kind of almost seems like after that long a period of time, maybe the interest in the football program is starting to wane a little bit. Maybe some of the better athletes are trying, different sports or just decided to set out, concentrate maybe on basketball or wrestling. But yeah, I think they've got a ways to go.
Yeah, I agree with you guys there. Yeah, the team I kind of have my eye on, as Steve mentioned, is Broadhead Judah, just because, there's a wild card there with a new, coaching staff and, just kind of a different makeup. They've been, pretty consistent in the SWC as far as being contenders go. And I guess if I had to pick a dark horse of the lower tier teams in the conference, I do think River Valley might have some opportunity there just because Andy Fiskey's a very good running back, 1,000-yard rusher last year. And, based on what the coaches had told Travis Wilson of WithSports.net, that their line is getting bigger and getting stronger. So you would imagine that a better offensive line for a 1,000-yard rusher does help them out quite a bit as well. So those are some of the things that I kind of have my eye on. Any other things about the SWC that you have your eye on throughout the season? Steve, we'll start with you.
Well, here's my prediction, or a prediction. The shortest game of the season is going to be Prairie du Chien and River Valley. That will be an hour and 45 minutes. It's going to be Thierry running the ball and Fiskey running the ball. Oh, and by the way, the Blackhawks are going to win. So that's my first prediction for the SWC this year.
That's going on a limb there.
Yeah.
I know. See, Gary thinks this is funny because he didn't hear any of this last year.
That's the hard-hitting analysis that you can expect from the high school football roundup. That's
right. Just wait until the high five comes up.
Yeah. I think one of the things you were talking about Broadhead Judith, but I think one of the things to look for there, again, the number of graduating kids they had out, 13 they lost, another 6 were offensive and defensive linemen. So there again, with a new coaching staff and all that, that's a big hurdle to overcome there as well.
That brings up an interesting point because it kind of feels as though teams are going to go this year specifically as far as their offensive lines can take them because offensive line play is going to be huge, obviously, for Prairie and Valley specifically. It always is big for Lancaster, certainly. And Platteville, that's the one position group that they don't have a lot of experience coming back in. So is this the year of the offensive linemen, maybe in the SWC, possibly?
Well, with the way the number of quarterbacks that are kind of progressing in the SWC, especially TJ Pink at Platteville, like you said, the total success of that team, I think, is going to rely heavily on the offensive line.
Oh, absolutely, because they have arguably the best combination of quarterback, running back, and receiver back. With Pink threw for more than 2,000 yards in his first season. That's what blows everybody's mind. Tyler Sass, fast running back, and Lucas Ledlam is clearly one of the best receivers in the entire area. Those guys get any time at all to do their thing as far as, Pink having time to throw, Ludlam having time to get open, and Tyler Sass having holes to run through. I think they're the favorite probably in the SWC, and for good reason, but it is very much going to depend on how the offensive line is able to develop over the relatively fast.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm not the type of person that likes to give hot takes, but in the spirit of what Steve was mentioning, I will give a very bold hot take / prediction for the SWC. I think that 3 teams do go to the postseason out of the SWC. It'll be Platteville, Lancaster, and Prairie du Chien. All 3 will host a home game in level 1. All 3 will advance to at least level 3 with the different divisions. That's the path that I think. I think both teams, or all 3 teams in the SWC, have hyper competitive teams. They're going to play very tough games, all against each other, especially in conference play. The out of conference games for the teams are going to be hyper competitive, and I think that that competitive season for all those teams pays off in the postseason and helps them prepare for a deep postseason run. So I think that 3 teams get to level 3 out of the SWC. That's my bold prediction / hot take for the people that have been dying and clamoring to have our broadcasters give such things on this little YouTube show that we've started. So
and keep this in mind also as far as that goes. Platteville, once again, has a murderous non-conference schedule because they have to go to Darlington and they have to go to Mineral Point. Both of those teams made the playoffs. So does Prairie because, they get, again, La Crosse, Aquinas, and Darlington to start their season. So if they're not ready based on that kind of schedule for the conference season to start, they're never going to be ready.
I agree with you there. And And how about right out of the gate, the first game that we have on Queen Radio on August 23rd, Platteville at Darlington. And we were talking about this at the end of last year, Steve. If those two teams had met towards the end of the season, I think it's a different type of game that those two have. But to kick off the football season on our airwaves, what a blockbuster matchup to start things off.
Right, we'll see if we have the same weather the last time that Platteville played Darlington in the afternoon. Were you there with me for that game, Gary? I'm trying to remember.
Which one again?
Platteville and Darlington in 2014. There was an afternoon game, and the heat index was 104 at kickoff. I guess we'll see if that happens again.
That was the first game back that I ever did coming back to Queen Bee Radio. So, that was a hot day, and it being the first game of the season is almost kind of unfair, because both teams are still going to try to be getting their feet underneath of them. Like Tyler said, if that game would be more toward the middle or end of the season, I think it'd be an entirely different game.
Well, and that's one of the things that helped in Platteville's case is that they did have some things that they hadn't quite figured out when they played Darlington the first time. Yeah. And Darlington, in the second half really dominated Platteville. Therefore, they had those things that they figured out, moving some guys around and that sort of thing, and maybe some scheme changes. And they didn't lose again until in, second round of the playoffs after that. And of course, the week after the second game of the season was the first of their shutouts last year. And again, over a team, Mineral Point, that made the playoffs. So it's not like they were playing, a bad team that they shut out, because Mineral Point certainly wasn't. But that's not skipping difficult teams to play to start the year, certainly.
Right.
No, and two of the biggest losses that Platt will have to overcome, I think, offensively, team-wise, period, is the loss of Devin Edge and Zach McLean. McLean was a sizable target as a tight end over the middle, and Edge, there really wasn't a whole lot he couldn't do. So you've got two boys there that you're really going to have to try and fill in their places.
That's very true. But the thing that I think helps Platteville weirdly is the fact that McLean missed a lot of last year because of his broken jaw. And before that, Garrison Tashner missed a lot of the year before because of his Aaron Rodgers injury, the collarbone. So Platteville had to play people that maybe they wouldn't have had to play. And I think specifically of Myron Ryder, for instance, who it turned out had quite a good year for somebody who wasn't necessarily expected to see much of the field. So those injuries, they were huge injuries, but they forced Platteville to play some people that may not have made the lineup otherwise. Jerron Blevins was another one. And it's one of those weird things that actually turns out to be an advantage in the following year, which is this. Again, I think the bigger issue in Platteville's case, even though David Edge was a great, very versatile player, and McLean, I think any quarterback on planet Earth would love to throw to a 6'9" tight end. But again, it's those three offensive linemen that graduated that they have to replace, and that I feel like is a bigger question mark. And maybe I think the real biggest question mark coming into this year for the Hillmen.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah, it should be a very fun year in the SWC. Again, Platteville Hillmen football will be on Extreme 107.1 throughout the season, and we'll have the Lancaster Flying Arrows over on 97.7 Country WGOR. Thanks to Gary and Steve for joining me for our SWC preview. Make sure to check out the high school football roundup. Tomorrow we will have the SWAL conference preview. I'll be joined by Mark Evenstad, Rob Spangler, and our newest Queen Bee Radio sports broadcaster, Matthew Ginnanen, to talk things all about the SWAL. And check out our schedule throughout the week. We have coverage of high school football leading into the season during our conference preview week. We'll also have previews of the Six Rivers Conference and the 8-player football teams in our area. And we cap things off with our one-on-one with a great one interview with Travis Winkers, head coach of the Darlington Redbirds. Thanks again for joining us, and check us out for the next episode tomorrow for the SWAL preview.